welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q.
So I've been playing some Assassin's Creed Odyssey on the PC recently, and I have a pretty beefy PC as far as computers go, but for some reason, it's been having some trouble with Assassin's Creed.
Really?
Yeah. So, I've got a very good graphics card. I've got a very nice CPU. I've got plenty of RAM. But I was running it the other day, and I'd noticed in the past when I ran it, the computer seemed to be running a little bit more loud than it had previously. And so I was running it the other day, and I just decided to kind of it was noticeable, but it was quiet enough to where it wasn't really interfering with my enjoyment. But it started getting a little bit louder and a little bit louder. And then I left the room, and when I came back, sounded like it was screaming with a voice, which is not the sound you want to hear coming from the physical computer tower.
No, that's what you want out of your Taylor Swift goat memes on the internet, perhaps, but certainly not out of a computer.
Yeah, so I don't know what was going on there, but I did some research, and I guess apparently if you have it set to an uncapped frame rate, then it will try drawing as many frames as it can, and I guess that could be pretty taxing on the CPU, especially when it's coupled with the high graphics options that I have it set on. So I turned off the uncapped frame rate. I capped it at 60 because that's all my monitor can do anyways. And it's been okay today, so I'm hoping it continues to be okay in the future. I had a nice long session with it today, so I'm hoping that all my problems are behind me now.
To be fair, I've only played it on Xbox, but the mechanic where you can just at any point go full Nelly Furtado and become a bird and want to fly away, it felt to me like this impossible magic of the modern consoles. It's the type of, where those of us who grew up with games were used to seeing a generation leap feel more like, whoa, greater graphics or, high definition. And I guess kind of open world sort of came along with that, but we were doing semi-open world back in the PS2 days, even with the Grand Theft Autos. So, I think all of the stuff that we see moving forward, of course, graphics will continue to march forward, but as details become more subtle, it's going to be stuff like that. It's going to be, hey, just become, some of the crazy pitches we have on this show. Hey, you're just a fighter jet all of a sudden. And that type of hugely intensive task is going to continue to march forward, and maybe it's going to make your PC cry every once in a while.
Yeah, no, it's still very impressive. I think growing up as a gamer and kind of knowing just bits and pieces about the technology that I've gleaned from friends who are programmers and from watching YouTube breakdowns and stuff like that, is that usually when you're not looking directly at something, it deletes it from the world entirely. It is just to try to minimize all of the visual work that it has to do. It's if it's not within view, it doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And so, even when you plug in a GameCube emulator and you set it to widescreen, you see on the sides of the screen, all sorts of stuff starts freaking out because it's oh, this isn't supposed to exist. What do we do? A widescreen, we can handle that. But yeah, to see that you can just immediately pull out and just, fly anywhere on the island, zoom in and see all the NPCs walking around, that's very impressive.
I was recently explaining Remedy Entertainment games to Jessica, and I showed her Alan Wake and then Quantum Break, and she was like, wow, Quantum Break looks good in comparison to Alan Wake. But then I even noticed I played through the very intro level of both. In Quantum Break, there are some times in that intro level where the lighting catches it just the right way and the motion blur's firing, and they do a lot of great surface reflections and materials in that game where you go, holy cannoli, this looks almost, photo real to it, in fits and starts. And it's a wild, we live in a wild time, folks.
Yeah, I had that moment when I was playing the new Hitman 2 DLC recently, The Bank.
It just looks incredible.
Yeah, it's just so impressive. One of the first things you see going into it, you're walking in from this entrance hallway into this big grand room, is the reflection of the chandelier from the ceiling on the ground. And there's two different types of floor tiling, and the reflection reflects differently in both of them. And it just looks really, really beautiful. And I just spent some time just staring at the ground for a little bit. Well, let's get to some video games. I'm going to be starting us off today. And what I'm pitching is, so this is something that could probably be done on, I don't want to say lesser technology, on less imposing technology, perhaps, than what I'm going to suggest. But this is like the pie in the sky, blue sky dream that we're shooting for here. So what I'm envisioning is something like a Microsoft Surface, like one of those big Microsoft Surface tables that's like all a screen with NFC chips or NFC readers in the screen. And it's kind of like a card game Mexican standoff in which you have to watch your own hand. There's some sort of a task that you have to always be performing to score points. Like maybe you are performing like a simple addition problems or something between the cards, adding up cards and putting them into different stacks, something to keep everyone's attention occupied, something where you're incentivized to go quickly. But you or opponents can play shoot cards, which can eliminate players. And so basically what you're trying to do, kind of like Uno where everyone is playing at once, is that if nobody notices you play your shoot card, then for like 3 seconds or something, then the player's eliminated. But if somebody notices you during that time, after which you've already kind of drawn your gun, so to speak, but before the 3 seconds has elapsed, then you can be punished. And I was thinking of, if this was on a kind of Microsoft Surface table, then you could get some really great kind of, effects of, stuff playing out on the table like you would see in a lavish Vegas casino display or something like that. So
right.
I don't know entirely, but let's pick it up and see where it goes. Starting the clock.
Well, ambitious play with the Microsoft Surface table. I don't know how many copies we're gonna sell of this one.
Now, it would be more of like an event type, but like you would sell it to arcades or to casinos or something like that. It's not something that necessarily would be like home. But I think something like this, the basic rules could be done in a home setup with a much less lavish display. But I just don't really know how to keep people honest with timers and everything if there isn't a computer that's kind of keeping track of everything at once.
How do you see, so let's say it's at a Dave & Buster's. What's the mechanic of getting money over and over again?
Like getting real money or getting like points within the game?
Sorry, us, Dave & Buster's, making real money.
Oh. It would be like a pay-to-play type thing, or maybe there could even be some kind of a gambling mechanic or something that, whether it's a casino game or whether it's essentially just like an arcade game. It's a little bit tricky because there would be cards involved and you don't want somebody just walking off. So I don't know if it's something you would just like set on the floor in a Chuck E. Cheese, or whether it's something that you would have in a more kind of a place where you would expect to have, a dealer or a waiter or something around to kind of keep an eye on things.
Does this feel like, I know we pitched Fight Deck the other week. Is this kind of like Uno or War Speed for you?
Yeah, similar to that. It was kind of definitely inspired by that other pitch coming out of that one. Is like, what if there was a card game that also kind of involved an aspect of secrecy, and you don't know that you're gone until it's too late unless you're paying really close attention. But it has to be fast, and there has to be a lot of busy work. Otherwise, people's attention would... I want it to be difficult to split your attention from the tasks that you're performing in front of you.
Do you think it's possible to do, have this giant kiosk almost be set up as like a pyramid or a triangle and have this be like a 3-player game on 3 sides?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it could be... I think it would need to be at least 3 players. Like, just with 2 players, I think would be less interesting. The whole kind of Mexican standoff idea is that even if it would be like in movies, the Mexican standoff is like a 3-person standoff. And that even if you shoot one of them, the other person's going to kill you. So it's not really any good way out of it.
How do I get I'm thinking about how I get new quote shoot cards.
Yeah, I would think there would be some sort of a draw pile And so you don't know when your opponents draw shoot cards, but maybe you can try to like read their behavior and everything. But yeah, it's kind of random when people get playing cards and when people get the cards to perform whatever kind of actions are available within the game. Well, maybe there could be other ways that you can raise the stakes. So, obviously in situations in movies where there's this kind of Mexican standoff, and I hope that's not like a racist term that I keep using again and again. I think it just describes the types of standoffs that would happen in movies set in Mexico.
Yes.
But apologies if it is
I hope so.
Unintentionally racist. That's not my intention. But if in these movies where
late
this takes
18th
place,
century Southern American standoff.
I also don't know if it's good to refer to Mexico as Southern America.
Well, yeah, I guess so. We certainly, we're not treating them as such.
Let's stop digging ourselves a grave here.
Yeah.
We're not in that part of the cowboy movie yet. So yeah, some way to raise the stakes. So maybe there's cards you could play that add to kind of a collective gold in the middle that makes killing off the people that are remaining more and more tempting as you go, but it also has a potentially bigger payoff at the end. So, it's kind of like a gold pile in the middle that the last person standing gets.
That's interesting. What if you could now do something where, like, in addition to shoot cards, the equivalent of the wild draw 4 in an Uno deck is, in this game, potentially a agree to split.
Okay.
And what if you could get 2 players or some number of players to there's some mechanic where you're going to say, okay, we're going to agree to split. Everybody put up your agree to split cards. And during that phase, you can play either a gunshot or an agree to split. And potentially kill the other people who've agreed to split the pot with you.
So I'm thinking, of course, again, of this kind of screen table layout, and maybe at a point where somebody drops their agree to split cards, then, maybe there's 4 slots that kind of appear in front of people just visually on screen. And so you can put the agree to split, you're taking them up on the offer card in front of you. If somebody plays a shoot card, then you could play a shoot card and it would be an immediate shot to punish the person who was, I don't know, this seems messy. I don't know how to balance this all, but I do like in the movies, when somebody does fire that first shot, it is kind of a domino effect of, the chaos really begins at that point. So, I think removing the time penalty at that point, because you are just kind of exacting the word of the law at that point then.
I wonder if there could be a mechanic where if this happens in rounds, right? Like every trip around the circle is a round, and every round is potentially enriching the group, the entirety of the group in a very small way, but you don't want to necessarily encourage everybody to stay completely still and get out. Or maybe you make so many reasons to make that difficult that actually staying and not shooting the entire time and not getting shot still feels thrilling by the end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think about some mechanic where you're choosing who you're aiming at, because I feel like that concept of that standoff is always there's those moments where the guns toggle between other people, where suddenly one person becomes the person of interest and all the guns kind of centered on that, or they all get rejiggered around in a way. And I wonder how to simulate that in this.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I've been for the last few years and again this year been a judge for the Seattle Indies Expo, and kind of, we get lots of submissions, and then it's up to kind of the panel of judges to decide who gets into the show and who doesn't. And so this year there were a lot of card game and board game submissions. So I went to one of the multiplayer meetups for the judges over the weekend, and we got to play a number of card games and board games, and I discovered that I am still not very good at them. And I'm still very prone to misreading rules and misunderstanding how they work. So maybe I'm not the right person to be coming up with something like this, because I lack a basic grasp of card game etiquette, not etiquette, but rule.
Maybe everybody's got a gun and you don't even know if everybody has a bullet. I guess is that the shoot card in your mind? Like maybe you also have to have a
separate
bullet.
cards that you need to be, whatever kind of secretly discarding to load into your gun. Except you wouldn't ever pull out your shoot card if you didn't have bullets, because then you would just open yourself up as a target and not be accomplishing anything.
What happens if two people shoot each other? The money is divided up into the rest of the people?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess they would just cancel each other out. I don't know. Hate to do this, but we are out of time. I don't feel like we really got there.
I know. I was just barely picking up momentum on it. This is a tough one to crack.
Yeah. Well, if people in the audience are smarter with card games than we are, because that's definitely not my specialty, but it's worth a shot, then please do write in. We would love to hear your additions to this, or the ways that we are obviously going wrong, and the quick fixes that you would have. But for now, let's try to come up with a name, and let's come up with something that kind of gives it that spaghetti western feel, huh?
There was a movie recently called something like Bad Times at the El Royale. I wonder if there's something that could be, I think it's Bad Times at the El Royale. I wonder if there's something that feels like that. Like, what's the name of the place in From Dusk Till Dawn? That actually might be an explicit word now that I think about it.
I always like the name of the New Mexican town, Truth and Consequences. That's pretty cool.
Ooh, that's pretty good. So, okay. Why don't we do that? And then listeners, pitch us a version of this game where there's some mechanic, both two people agreeing to tell the truth, and if they don't sync up, one of them ends up dying.
Oh, so a prisoner's dilemma type thing.
Yeah. But with, the trappings of the old Western Mexican standoff.
I like it. Well,
asterisk, please let that not be a horrible term.
Yeah. Really hoping that that's the case. Otherwise, I got a lot of editing to do this week. All right. Well, Q, what are you bringing us this week?
Potentially an equally difficult thing. I was imagining a game that was something like Stardew Valley, but had a mechanic. It takes place potentially in a sci-fi setting and has a mechanic where the farmer can place fencing or put down localized fields where they're manipulating pockets of time. So imagine if you had a garden where you could put down a little sort of radial fence and all your plants in it would grow at 6 times the rate. Of course, all the weeds and bad stuff would grow at 6 times the rate and potentially turn pests into super pests as well. But you could hypercharge crops like that, and maybe you could even do that to age chickens to maturity and start giving you eggs. Just kind of the things that you could do if you could manipulate time, and waiting was not potentially a thing in a farmer's life.
All right. Let's start the clock then. This idea of manipulating time, and also perhaps of having cells that are kind of, I don't mean cells as in like molecular cells. I mean like enclosed structures that can house seeds and things like that could basically turn whatever's inside of it into kind of like a superior version of what it is, to fully enhance it, to give it the Captain America treatment. Because
but also potentially you could age past the usefulness of a thing, right? So you really have to pay attention to those.
That's a sci-fi setup that I see going into like an Alien or The Fly scenario, where it's like something else got caught in one of those cells if you're not careful, and then you open it up and then you have this kind of like genetically superior monster that's hunting you down. So
fingernails
you really
start falling out.
to perhaps experiment or be careful. You think like, oh, maybe I'll drop some chickens in there and they'll give me 100 eggs a day, but you bring it out and it's like this kaiju monster or something.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, you could put different things inside the chamber just to like, in the same way that you would combine ingredients and stuff in a cooking game just to see what you get. Same thing here. What happens if I put a pig in the enhancement chamber? Or you could do different types of chambers, right? Like your farm could have, the de-age, the age, the enhance, the make decrepit. Like, could you accidentally create an undead problem that breaks out on your farm?
Then, of course, if you had teleporters, you could do the actual thing that the fly did and try to combine different creatures, and teleporting things together gives you hybrids on the other end.
I like the idea of a game where like a lot of things are on timers. A farming game where you're like truly, there can be some mundane, like very normal feeling farming to it. And then being able to say, I don't even know if it's a time grenade is the right thing, but like being able to say, okay, this patch right now, I'm going to like plant this time scarecrow equivalent, this the little miracle grow spikes that I don't even know if those are sold anymore, but there used to be these little things of like, I'm going to inject nutrients into the soil right here and like to see what that does. Or maybe you could fill those vials with like different alien compounds you find and discover what their effects are.
Maybe this aging effect is actually a negative thing, and you're building these time scarecrows to basically scare away like the birds or the locusts or whatever kind of bring this time distorting effect with them, because it will like super age all of the crops, and they'll die, kind of like real locust swarms in real life. But or you can find ways to manipulate them. Maybe if you redirect them into your wine cellar, then it just immediately ages all of your wine and it doesn't kill your crops. And so, ways of directing the traffic of wild animals that have time distorting properties.
What if you start off with a farm that looks like beautiful and utopic, but for whatever reason, you realize at the onset of the game that the planet that you're on, these crops, you like pick them, but your ability to pick the crops is like far outweighed by the speed of which the crops like grow, age, and go bad. So you kind of find yourself like, oh my God, I had this huge farm. It immediately collapses on you, and you're sort of journeying out and finding equipment to create pockets of slowed down time in order to just literally, now you're playing with the metaphor of literally returning to a slower time, right? A simpler time where you're slowing down time and you're actually trying to like make the management of your farm, your garden boring.
Maybe there's some animals that make time go faster and then other animals that make it go slower. And so you kind of want to have these like big tortoises with these, emitting this whatever kind of time radiation from their backs to keep things more manageable.
Yeah, you could potentially pull a Viva Pinata and grow certain, like get yourself to the point where you grow certain crops and Minecraft style, attracting different animals. And then if you can sort of herd those animals, and I don't know, farming's not the right word. What is the word to like
ranching, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So if you become like an animal ranching person, a rancher, then they potentially like the output of, one animal is not necessarily meat in this scenario. It's fuel for your time slower downers, and some are fuel for your time speeder uppers, and you're like trying to always stay ahead of your fuel, and you need to ranch for fuel. Just the same way like methane is a real energy source, right?
So what if the rest of society was also kind of plagued by this speeding up and slowing down thing? So kind of like in Stardew Valley, how you have to go into town to do various things. Every interaction you have in town is somehow colored by this reality. So, as you are, I don't know, what do you do in Stardew Valley? Selling things or going to the auction? Like that could actually, going to the auction, you'd have a pretty strong advantage if you could slow down time or speed up time to keep other people from outbidding you. Maybe when you're dating people in town, I don't know.
One of the things that's kind of neat about that is, Stardew Valley has the very quaint sense of like, oh, you can gain romance with someone, where if you, like the very first thing that the game does as part of the tutorial to set you up fictionally is like equip you with this time belt, right? So you become the only person, you're the first person to be unaffected by this time stream, and then you're slowly building up, ranching and building up your crops, not to create like a profit or a farm, but really to become like the town healer and like try to sustain the life. And your success is measured by like the lives that you save and the average age of the town for a person, right? Like And the average actual age, right? Like the initial average age might be like 4 days. And you could find yourself in scenarios, right, where you're talking to people, and as you're slowly building up, time slowing down, and you're trying to grind time to a halt, the end game might be like you've fully frozen time or whatever, but you could romance someone and they could pass away, right? You'll have that Captain America effect of like, the person I love is an old woman now, and now they're dying, and then the ultra creepy, now I've got some romance happening with their son. And you're like, okay, this is strange, but yeah, you could kind of do really weird sci-fi storytelling like that.
Perhaps there's these societies where like the environment is getting worse at such a rapid pace that all of the cities in the world have kind of put themselves in a bubble. And within that bubble, time moves like ultra fast. And you would think that like, oh, you know, they're just speeding towards their own extinction. But like actually what's happening is that in the course of the few good years that the world has left, they're going through generations and generations of people all having, you know, fun, fulfilling lives. But yeah, so that gets into some interesting questions about like, is that, because I guess they are experiencing many, many, many years and decades. So I guess there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the rest of the world that sees them puff out in an instant.
If you dialed it incorrectly, you could essentially make people at the beginning of the game sort of feel like mayflies, where like the elder of the town is 6 weeks old. You know, I know you would have to really bend the rules of like, okay, well, how long does it take someone to talk, you know, or because how do you go from like baby to, you know, adult in that span of time? But if you write it correctly, maybe there's some way to say, oh, a human is actually going through all the stages, but like the intelligence level of the town is low. The technology, you know, everything is totally decimated because you essentially have like living human babies that are like just kind of procreating slow, you know, just this horrible state. And you're just trying to like maybe return time to normal, like get people living on the span of years.
I think the subjective experience within the town would feel normal. It would just be like the rest of the world that is essentially moving extremely slowly by comparison.
Right.
All relativity. Anyways, there's some interesting ideas in there. Let's shut that down and come up with a name.
Time Town. Nope, that's not good. What do you say when something is like separate from time?
It doesn't come up often.
Yeah, right.
You could turn the word eternal into like a place name, like Eternopolis or something like that. I don't know what the most effective way to spin that would be.
If you want to give it that Stardew Valley vibe, just the word like valley is doing a lot there. Maybe you do like Paradox Village or Paradox Town or something like that.
Paradox Valley has kind of a fun ring to it.
Paradox Valley's pretty good. And it's adjacent. It's the DLC for a Stardew.
Yeah. It feels like a hacky Twin Peaks ripoff you would see like in the background of another TV show or something.
Yeah, or in a
Welcome
Remedy
to
game.
Paradox
period.
Valley.
You know what? I'm excited for whatever listener submission we're going to have today, because I am a little bit stressed and a little bit loving how much of a mess the two pitches have been this week.
Let's see if y'all can pull through and get us to where we need to be for this one.
Help us or bring us down. This could be the peak of the show right now.
All right. Well, let's see what's coming through. And again, before we get to that, we are actually running low on pitches right now. If you would like to submit a game idea of your own, then you can do that by going to playwrightcast.com/pitch or just emailing us directly at playwrightcast@gmail.com. And we'd love to read out some of your ideas on the show. We only have a couple left at this point. You know, it kind of waxes and wanes, but we need to refill quickly. Otherwise, we'll go back to reading our spam messages or something else.
And you don't want us doing that.
That's right. You don't want us being creative on a show like this. This comes from Chesney Mooncalf, who we've heard from in the past few times now, who says, "Hello, my fine friends. Congrats on the soon-to-be 100th show." Oops, this is an old one. From a couple months ago anyways. Recently you suggested smashing two games together, so I got thinking about Outrun meets Papers, Please. Interesting. A game in which you have to drive from one end of the continent from one end of a communist-era Soviet Union to the other on a knackered old Trabant. Is that?
I'm not sure of these two words.
Yep, these are new words to me. Trabant or Lada? Sorry, they're probably cars.
Trabant?
Cars. Trabant? Could be.
Seems right.
Anyways, let's just envision them as being cars. Every now and then, your car will break down and you need to utilize all your engineering skills to improvise a fix. As both games contain multiple possible endings, I thought it would be possible to continue that with this game. Maybe introduce a bit of Crazy Taxi into the mix, allowing you to pick up passengers along the way. Possibly political dissonance, general enemies of the state. As you drive, you can talk to them and work out what their story is. If you get caught helping them out, then you get sent to a Siberian gulag and have to start the journey all over again. What say you? All right, starting the clock there. So actually, I wanted to mention before getting into this, there is a game that is, I think, pretty similar to this. So, again, not to discourage this pitch in particular, but I just want to make sure we're not stepping on anyone's toes here and, overriding something. Or if people are interested, then they can download it and start playing right away. But it's a game called Jalopy, and that might even have a kind of Siberian, Russian type of slant to it as well. I don't remember. I've not played it. I just remember hearing about it maybe a year or two ago. But yeah, it is a game where you are making a long distance road trip in a unreliable car, and you do have to perform some of those mechanical things by the side of the road every once in a while when it breaks down. So shout outs to Jalopy, but that's not going to stop us. We're going to take this in a different direction and see where we can get with it.
Well, I really like this idea. I think that I didn't play a ton of Final Fantasy 15 because I kind of stopped when they said they were fixing it and then never came back to it. But one of the things I did like about that game was that feeling of people on a road trip, right? But taking a road trip, and I think I've pitched something too before in the past that is like, you're on a train going across the whole country and the train is always breaking down and you're having to get out and come back and that sort of thing. So the idea of having an unreliable vehicle, and not in the sort of, I think, how do we turn it into a game and not just have that kind of narrative Naughty Dog / Hollywood conceit of like, oh, there's something wrong again. Let's start chapter 3.
So in this game, you play a mechanic, and I like that as a kind of central mechanic. I'm reusing words. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I like that as a central conceit in this case. So what if you have this kind of clunky car and there are other cars kind of littered across the world? And so maybe you are borrowing things from their cars to repair your own, kind of salvaging, or maybe you could choose to take another car using some of the working parts that you have left in your own. And maybe eventually you can find ways to install missing components into a tank or into a submarine or something. Like, I want to go, bigger with this, kind of make it feel a little bit more like 80 Days, that wonderful phone game from a few years back.
Like, vehicles have different parts they need. Even a rowboat, right? Like, potentially affixing a motor to it is a big thing.
Yeah, sure. So kind of not limiting people's modes of transportation, but giving them lots of options if they can figure out how to do it.
That would be really interesting. And I think that the idea of you have people with you and that number of people is like growing and shrinking throughout your journey. You're going to need different modes of transport to handle that, whether like that grows to be like, you know what, I found a car, it's very reliable for me, I'm going to figure out how to like tow another thing behind me to carry people, or I'm going to like take its headlights and stuff and just affix it to this other thing and just get a bigger vehicle because I feel like that's safer. Like the idea of going through the Soviet Union, as they say, just like the idea of travel and the feeling of like if someone stops you, it's over. Like being able to create that sort of narrative pressure would be really interesting. Yeah,
and to make it feel kind of like a Far Cry game where you're improvising the entire way and you're not really settling just on one vehicle. You are picking up and using whatever you can to try to get a little bit further and make that push. I do like also what you said about headlights, because I think headlights are a really cool mechanic that doesn't really get taken advantage of enough. I was watching a review of one of the recent racing games. I don't remember its name because these more kind of simulation-y racers, the ones that take place on like actual tracks and are meant to be very physics accurate and everything, all kind of blur together for me because I've never really been a fan of the genre.
I'll help you. Forza. No, I'm just kidding.
Less, more simulation-y than that one. But yeah, it's the review made a big deal about how, you could knock out your headlights if you took a bad turn, and that would be a major disadvantage in night races because you basically just couldn't see anything anymore, which seems like such an obvious thing, but you would think in situations where you are driving quickly and potentially recklessly, your headlights would be the first thing to go if you were to make a head-on collision, because they're these glass little bulbs sitting right at the very front of the most vulnerable part of the car. So being protective of your most vulnerable spot in a way that I think most video games just kind of forgive you or don't crank the darkness up that much to the point where you really need them. If you lose your headlights in a GTA game, you're still fine.
It would also be kind of cool. So there's a feeling that one of the closest things I felt to it in a game with cars is actually Uncharted 4, if you can believe this.
Okay.
But the winch mechanic, and the ability to kind of tie yourself to things and claw your vehicle's way up on stuff. Granted, they did that in a very sort of controlled and limited way, but that's the type of thing that you see get used in a Top Gear or Grand Tour quite a bit, where they're in these situations like trying to get across a rickety wooden bridge somewhere. And those feelings of if you can dynamically ratchet up things like the tension, getting the right music cues, and making somebody feel like every pull of the right trigger, push of the gas pedal, if you will, is like an inch away from disaster for their vehicle, and the vehicle is really the only safe space in the game, then you could make the act of crossing a 30-foot, that's about 10 meters for our friends that drive Trabants, bridge, then you could like put some real drama in a relatively small space, especially if you're this is a Crazy Taxi, I think, like what was pitched here a little bit by Chesney. So you're potentially going over the same area multiple times. Like, what condition did you leave that bridge in last time you crossed it?
Yeah, I think a winch is a very smart thing because it keeps you from abandoning vehicles, unless, of course, you're going to a different vehicle, but it keeps you from, in most video games, we're encouraged to, if we need to be on foot, just leave the vehicle, we'll find another one, and instantly be able to turn it on without any kind of work at all. It gives you a little bit more attachment to the vehicles that you have, and it makes sure that, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you don't have your vehicle with you. I think the Mad Max game tried to kind of endear its vehicles to you as a necessary tool for traversal, kind of like that as well.
I hate to use buzzwords here, but there's something to this pitch that I can imagine the Hollywood grayness of Soviet Russia and the slow lurching of crossing a dangerous bridge or a particularly tight turn on a mountaintop that would actually make the pace of this feel way less like a Need for Speed or even a Grand Theft Auto. And this could feel like the quote Dark Souls for cars. Like, you want to every
Dark Souls for cars, but we're entirely serious. I love it.
Yeah, and I mean that in the best possible way of like, hey, before you hit the gas, you better be ready.
Yeah, definitely.
You could hit somebody, right? Is that real? And then like if you have also the type of environment where essentially every second you spend outside the car is creating this heat for you, whether it's to go fish out another car part or to do a repair or whatever. And then the risk is your car, your team is thrown in jail, you're impounded, your car's impounded, and you have to start again with a new vehicle and potentially a new group of people, or the group shrinks, right? They're like, well, some people permanently went to jail from your group, and you're trying to like help people who would otherwise be criminals according to the state.
Yeah. I don't know if you need necessarily a physical consequence for getting out of your car. I think, if it's built around being in cars, then just having a big enough map to where like foot traversal is implausible. You would still have those people who are like, for charity, I'm going to do a 72-hour stream of me running forward and trying to cover the map on foot. But,
Sure.
for practical purposes, you definitely want a vehicle.
I guess the same thing I mean is like, even if you had very short abbreviated chase sequences, like knowing that damage to your vehicle is a real problem.
Right,
like,
yeah.
The way you feel during a chase would be, way different.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. And we're out of time. Thank you again, Chesney Mooncalf, for sending that one in.
Chesney, you saved the show.
Yeah, I like
did
this.
it.
This one's really cool, actually. I'm into it. So let's come up with a name.
Car Souls. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure it's going to already be the name of a car, but the term comrade feels already like a car model to me.
How do we
Like,
communicate that through the title, though? Because if somebody sees a game called Comrade, they're not necessarily thinking like, oh, that must be a car pun.
I don't know why in my head, like a 1971 Comrade feels like a
There's
good.
the Soviet block and an engine block, but I don't know how to make those things fit together.
Could you just call it something like Moscow Road or Moscow Highway or something like that?
Moscow Rush could be another San Francisco Rush game.
Moscow Rush. That's kind of cool, but of course the game is potentially very slow, which is kind of fine. I don't. Is that
it could be kind of like ironic in that way. Like when people say New York minute, they mean like a very, very short amount of time, not actually a minute.
So this is a Moscow Rush.
Yeah, it's got that nice rhythm to it as well. It's like a Blitzkrieg Bop or Ballroom Blitz.
I was gonna say Moscow Mule actually also works here because mules transport things, but
actually that's not bad because that kind of like it puts forward the idea that the car is so bad that it's barely even worth considering a car.
Right,
like
right. Maybe
just a pack
it
beast.
even opens with like a semi-flat tire, so it's kind of lurching back and forth with bags on the back of it like a mule would.
Yeah, I do like that. Okay, I think that's the one we're going to settle on here. Moscow Mule. Thank you very much. Again, Chesney, if you, the listeners, would like to send something in, and we pray you do so soon because we're running out, then you can do so by going to playwrightcast.com/pitch. You can email us playwrightcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at playwrightcast. In all of those instances, it is PLAYWRITECAST.
And while you're listening to an episode, you might hear that jingle at the beginning and end. That is Protodome's Hello World. Special thank you to Protodome for letting us use that song now for, 106, 107 times? So we appreciate it, and we credit him every time. And go check out the other great shows on the Kane and Rince Network, like the Kane and Rince Video Game Review Podcast, where they just reviewed Final Fantasy X that everybody seems to like except for me. The Sausage Factory interviews with game developers, and Sound of Play. And on Sound of Play, there was an amazing interview this week, and there's going to be another one next week. I don't want to spoil anything for next week, but
it's a big deal.
Yeah, pay attention to that one. My ears will be glued, if that's a phrase that I can make up just now.
Oh, well, let's get that glue out of that ear, and let's come up with a final pitch to take us out of the show today. What I want to do is a game where you play as a benevolent hat god that has to fling hats kind of Frisbee style from the heavens and land on appropriate people's heads.
Somebody call the Team Fortress devs.
That's the one, yeah. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye. Dark Souls for cars.